Coming up, Regarding Men speaks with Warren Farrell. Well, welcome to Regarding Men, a place where we hold men in high regard and where red pill loneliness comes to die. Anyway, I'm here with my two favorite men's advocates outside of one other who we're going to introduce in just a second. Paul Elam from paulelam.com and Janice Fiamengo from the Fiamengo Files, and I'm Tom Golden, and we're here today with Warren Farrell. And Warren is a legend as far as I'm concerned. He has done more for our movement than anybody I can think of. And let me tell you, Warren has written some books. In fact, I think he's written more books than I have fingers. And they're all good. And Warren is very, very particular about his books. He wants everything to be just right. So when you read these, you're going to get references, you're going to get, everything, footnotes, the whole 9 yards. He's very, very particular. And it started in 1974, Warren, when you wrote The Liberated Man. That was your first one. And then came The Myth of Male Power. Man, did that book change me. That was just an amazing, amazing book. And it still is. With the new cover, I think I've read it again. So The Myth of Male Power, then whoops, we don't want to turn that off. What Women Can't Hear, What Men Don't Say, which is one of my favorites. Father and Child Reunion. Why Men Are the Way They Are. Why Men Earn More. And that one, man, it just turned the wage gap into a myth so quickly. And it's amazing how long it's taken that myth to die. And then the last one, the most recent one, is The Boy Crisis. So, Warren, you really don't need an introduction. I think, people know you already. And so that's the best introduction I could give, would be just looking at all the things that you've done so far. And why won't that turn off? There it goes. And so we're really happy to have you here today. And we're going to talk today about a bunch of things. But one of the things we're going to talk about is The Boy Crisis, your latest book. And why don't we start, Warren, by talking a little bit about what are the causes of the boy crisis? What's going on? Can you help us understand that?
Yes, actually, maybe I should, if I may, Tom, may I just explain some of the actual evidence for the boy crisis?
Yeah, good.
Because
good.
Many people don't even realize there is one, and it happens on so many levels. And one of the things that I was most struck by initially was that I started looking at all 56 of the largest developed nations, and seeing that in all of the developed nations, boys were doing worse than girls in almost every single academic subject, but especially in reading and writing. And as it turns out, reading and writing, as you probably know, are the two biggest predictors of success or failure. So we were really setting up boys all around these developed nations for success and failure. And I started asking, so that was one piece of evidence. And I'll come back to the key word in that sentence, which is developed nations, and what the connection between developed nations and the cause of the boy crisis is. But that just that's just one part of the evidence. As a result of doing worse in school, boys were much more likely than girls to drop out of school. And the boys who dropped out of school were by their early 20s. This is before this piece of data I'm going to give you now is before the COVID. The unemployment rate among the boys that dropped out of school was more than 20% in their early 20s, as opposed to 3.8%, which was the national unemployment rate before COVID in the United States. You could see that it was more than 5 times higher than the national unemployment rate. And these boys were 66% more likely to live at home with their mothers than their sisters were. And so you know how appealing a man is who meets a woman at a party and says, "Oh, I'm living with my mom. You want to come home?" And so these boys often felt like losers, and were oftentimes then felt like they needed to turn to pornography, because pornography was access to a variety of attractive women without fear of rejection at a price they could afford. But the pornography often got them addicted to more and more exciting, quote unquote, ways of being with women, when they finally met their first real woman, the woman was feeling like, she was being treated like an object, because she was being treated like an object. And so that made the woman withdraw, which only proved to them that they were losers. And they were sort of, from the girls and women's perspective, losers, and women aren't very interested in dating losers. And so the whole cycle of that led to depression, that often led to taking drugs, becoming addicted to video games, taking opioids or other forms of drugs. And
so it's like a funnel almost. It just sort of funnels down and it gets worse and worse.
Absolutely like a funnel. Yeah. And then I started looking at the suicide rate, and I saw that, for example, when boys and girls are 9 years of age, their suicide rate is equal. But by the ages of 10 to 14, the boys' suicide rate becomes twice that of girls.
Right.
At the ages of 15 to 19, it becomes 4 times that of girls. At the ages of 20 to 25, it becomes almost 5 times that of girls or women. And so so there's a huge number of hidden questions and insights in that type of progression. But the evidence for it is that enormous different suicide rate. And of course, when we move to the men part of this, outside of the boy crisis, a relatively small number of people realize that 85-year-old men who are 85 years old or older are likely to commit suicide at 1,750% more likely than their female counterparts.
Damn.
And obviously, if this was happening with women, we would all know this.
Exactly. Exactly. It's crazy, isn't it?
It really is.
And even the suicide agencies don't do anything about it. I mean, they don't put it on the front page. They don't say anything about this.
And when you ask the suicide agencies why they don't, they say we cannot get, and this is the real crime, we cannot get funding to include male inclusive suicide.
Exactly.
So the bigger issue there, of course, is we'll get in a minute to the causes. So if you wish to ping me on why is it that we don't care about men, and what the epigenetics of that is, and the genetic heritage of that is. But just to stay with the evidence for a moment. When it comes to mental health, most people think that when guys and girls break up, the woman is depressed, and the guy just goes on and tries to have sex with somebody else. It turns out the opposite is true. When you measure depression by including the ways that men express depression, and then you dig in from there, that you find that the males are significantly more likely to be depressed, to be suicidal, to turn to drinking, to do this. In the Boy Crisis book, I outlined 63 signs, red flags of depression or suicide, and most of those we don't even ask about men. And so, particularly if a man is a white male, and he tends to keep his feelings to himself and his fears to himself, and expresses it to nobody. There's no groups like the type of groups you have formed for the average man to sort of talk about what's happening with them, what angers them, and so on. And so they tend to sort of act out in different types of ways. And so I started asking, and this is just the mental health issues and the physical health. I was shocked to see that that men not only we mostly know that men are more likely to become obese than women are when they're in their teenage years. Males are, but we very few know the degree to which that obesity leads to other physical health problems. That by the age of 9.5 years of age, boys particularly that have minimal or no father involvement, and girls that have minimal or no father involvement, have telomeres. Telomeres are the biggest predictor of how long you will live, and they are inside of your cells, and they hold the genes that either help you prevent or be more likely to get cancer and diabetes and other significant problems. And boys and girls without fathers are without a lot of father involvement, are 14% more likely to have shorter telomeres.
Really?
Shorter telomeres at the age of 9.5 which is when the studies were done, are the single biggest predictors of your life expectancy.
Right.
The shorter the telomeres, the shorter the life expectancy. However, boys' telomeres are yet again 40% shorter than the girls when they have dad deprivation. So this just begins to, show you how embedded this. This is not just stuff that people are making up. These are scientists having, just parsing the data and throwing it out there. And I read the studies and see, wow, this is fascinating. But no one else was pointing out this male-female difference, and nobody else was pointing out the connection to father involvement, except that it happened to be in the studies. And so these are we see that in studies of around in England that the IQs of males have dropped by 15%. We see that the sperm counts of males in other studies have dropped 50%. When the sperm counts of males drop 50%, that has an impact on fertility, which has an impact on the health of your child. And this is not just boy children, but girl children. When we don't care about boys, we don't really care about girls in the final analysis either. I have, 2 daughters, and I don't think, neither one of them was interested in marrying a guy who had no motivation, who wanted to drop out of high school, and who had no postponed gratification. Right. So this is a little bit of just the overt evidence of this, and this is just the tip of the iceberg that I've mentioned here.
Warren, when you look at all these maladies, and there are many, I mean, you just rattled off a bunch of them. I wonder, have you done any kind of comparison as to, say, examine the state of boys and men 50 to 75 years ago versus what's going on with them today? I mean, obviously their testosterone dropping and their sperm counts dropping is a product of recent times more than anything else. I wonder if you attribute that to endocrine disruptors or what's going on with that. But essentially, how have things changed in the last 50 years that have exacerbated all of these problems for boys and men?
No, they've changed significantly. One of the, in addition to the ones that I mentioned, like the obesity rates, the sperm counts dropping, and so on. There are many other ways that boys and men are hurting. For example, the life expectancy, historically speaking, every generation has had an increase in IQ. This has now reversed for males. Wow. Secondly, in addition to the increase in IQ, in every generation, actually every year, males and females have had an increased life expectancy prediction. Right. And excuse the expectancy and prediction, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. But this is the first time that any gender's life expectancy has gone down. It has gone down for males for 3 years in a row. And never has gone down for any gender for more than a short period of time, except very briefly during war times when huge amounts of men. And we have to remember in World War I, for example, in the Battle of the Somme, there was 1.2 million people, mostly men, of course, killed or injured, and so that had an effect on life expectancy. But in not non-severe war times, that's even with Vietnam wars and so on, the life expectancy has increased until just the last 3 years.
So, what do you think's behind that, Warren? The life expectancy.
Yes, I started measuring when I submitted the boy crisis to my publisher for the acceptance of the overall proposal. I had 10 causes outlined of the boy crisis, and then I started doing my deeper dive into each of the causes, and I started seeing that the hub cause was lack of father involvement. And when I say the hub cause, what I mean is so for example, if a male grew up in a female only home and he went to a female teacher only school, he was very deeply impacted. However, if he went from a female and a male equally involved with him home, and then went to a school that had only female teachers, there was a difference, but the difference was very minimal. So I began seeing that the male teachers in the school were important, but they were especially important to the dad-deprived boys, so that dad-deprived boys didn't go from dad-deprived at home to male role model deprived at school, and then we wonder why they look up to a gang leader or a drug dealer for some respect, for some money, gaining opportunity, for some sense of family. And so I started seeing that, okay, Warren, you cannot put male teachers in schools at the same level as the dad deprivation. And then I started looking at all the other 9 causes, and the same type of thing, happened with the dad deprivation. So then I went back to the developed countries thing that I mentioned was so crucial before. And I realized that in the developed nations where there was the boy crisis existing, the common denominator of the developed nations is that the nations felt successful enough to begin to give permission in their laws and then their social ostracism or social approval for permission for divorce. And the divorces led very frequently throughout the world to a minimum or minimum father involvement or a complete lack of father involvement. And so I started breaking down that demographic. But there was still another demographic of boys that were having problems. And so I started looking at that, and they began to be grouped under a second group, which is the sons of mothers who had children without being married. And so I said, well, what's many people say, and I said, what's the importance of marriage? And what I found is that couples that were married, the fathers were likely to stay involved much longer. But when the couples that weren't married, the average length of time of father involvement was 3.5 years. And so the children would have a little bit of an exposure to father. And then the boy especially would feel like, what's wrong with me? I'm just deserted by my dad. Yeah. And both the boys and girls didn't get all of the uniquenesses of dad-style parenting that children get more from their dad. I'll be happy to talk a little bit later about this differences between dad-style parenting and mom-style parenting that I found to be so crucial in raising boys versus girls, yes. Boys and girls, the importance of both parents being about equally involved. And so that I started looking at these 2 groups, the children of parents who weren't married. Now we have to understand that in the United States, among young women 30 and under 30, that 53% of women under 30 who have children in the United States are not married. And you can take a liberal or a conservative perspective on marriage, but if you take I care about the children perspective on marriage, then we have to realize that the children suffer because of that dynamic that I mentioned when there isn't father involvement. Right. Overall, the percentage of children being born to single mothers that aren't married is 42% in the United States. And it's in that 42% that the problems lie. And we have known this since 1965 when the Moynihan report came out. Right. And in the Moynihan report, he was a famous sociologist after whom, by the way, a good part of Penn Station has now been named after him, the Moynihan train station. And his report, everybody was afraid when he started to do his report that he was going to look at inner city crime and it was going to be a racist report that said that blacks cause inner city crime. But being a good sociologist, he looked at a large number of variables also. And he found it wasn't blacks per se that committed the crimes. It was those children of black families where there was a lack of father involvement, which at that point in time in 1965, that was 25% of black families. Today in Caucasian families, lack of father involvement is 32% to 40%, depending on how you calculate it, but let's say 32%. It was, when Moynihan did the Moynihan report, 3.2%.
Right.
And so we see this enormous increase in lack of father involvement in the Caucasian communities. But now in the African American communities, it's 74 to 75% lack of father involvement.
Gracious.
And so, what we're blaming oftentimes in our unconscious mind on Blacks is actually much more accurately looked at by looking at lack of father involvement and seeing how that's also happening in the Caucasian families where there's a lack of father involvement as well as the Hispanic families where there's a lack of father involvement. So that's just a little headline on that issue.
It's fascinating.
Well, when we look at across the spectrum at many of these different areas that you've just described, whether it's our family courts, the issues of father involvement, what's going on in our colleges and universities, what's going on in our elementary schools, our primary schools, one of the things we see over and over again, and even into the mental health industry at large, we see over and over again groups of ideologues who can only be described as anti-male and who appear to be, all these problems that you're talking about appear to be at least aggravated by feminist orthodoxy across the board. Am I wrong on that?
As many of the listeners know, and as you know very well, Paul, I was involved with on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City for 3 years. And so I can really say from my personal experience that, I would go around and speak at these, feminist conventions, and I would see the books that explain that, the books by Lenin that explain that the family was an institution of patriarchy that did not respect, that put down women at the and put up men and made rules to benefit men at the expense of women. And when you go to, and I taught in women's studies classes at San Diego State, which was the first university in the country to have women's studies classes. And I can tell, and almost all of my initial speaking engagement were sponsored by women's studies classes and feminists. And so I can say with some, I think, credibility that no feminist would disagree with the sentence I'm going to say now. We have lived in a patriarchal world dominated by men who have made the rules to benefit men at the expense of women. And what I am saying in the myth of male power is that no, we didn't live in a world dominated by a patriarchy. We lived in a world dominated by the need to survive. And in order to survive, women played a role that was extremely restrictive, and men played a role that was extremely restrictive. Women's role was raise children, get married and raise children. Men's role was get married and raise money or some equivalent thereof. Kill the enemy, kill for food. Women's role was to love and be loved. Men's role was to kill and be killed. And so every generation had its war, and in those wars we gave men social bribes, and the social bribe was, your uncle, he died as a Marine in World War I, and his picture is on our mantle. Nobody else's picture is on our mantle in our home, but he was a real hero that we have to respect and have, and so the boy begins to learn the social bribe of, I can get love and approval by being willing to die as a Marine or whatever in the next war. And so we had these social bribes for male disposability. But we as feminists didn't say, thank you, men, for being willing to die. We never said our affirmative action should include the next 500 years of females only being registering for the draft for the war, and men staying home and loving and being loved while women are killed and be killed, because we believe in equality. We're all in favor of women having this affirmative action program, and so this is. But rather, and then when I started investigating the pay gap. It was very clear to us, quote unquote, clear to us, that men earned at that time when I first started doing the demonstrations and leading the demonstrations on the men's groups, I would wear a pin saying 59%. 59 cents, which meant 59 cents to the dollar, of course, at that time. And I had no idea until I started investigating it, that it's not men that earn $1 for each 59 cents that women earn for the same work. It is men, it is fathers who earn more money than mothers do once they become fathers, because when men and women become fathers and mothers, as opposed to just males and females, it is then that the women will do one of three things. 40% are likely to be full-time involved with the children. 40% are full-time involved in the workplace, but they cut their workplace hours back until to close to 35 hours per week, and oftentimes down to less than 52 weeks a year. And then the other 20% is work part-time. So when women cut back on working and the demand for money becomes greater, men start quitting jobs they would love to do, like being musicians or elementary school teachers. I know a number of people. I was trained as a teacher. A number of my friends quit jobs that in junior high school and high school. They loved teaching. That was their passion. That's what they were trained to do. That's what their heart was in. But when they had children, they gave up being as teachers, and they became administrators, principals and superintendents of schools. Right. They often hated being administrators. They weren't cut out for that. That wasn't their mentality, but they did it because their children, they wanted their family to have better homes and better neighborhoods with better schools and opportunities that they never had for themselves. But what did we as feminists do? We called those men privileged, as opposed to saying, thank you, men, for being willing to earn more money. Thank you for understanding that the road to high pay is a toll road, and you were willing to pay those tolls to raise your children and give your children opportunities that you never had. And this is what we feminists completely missed. And so we created a culture of male privilege, male entitlement, patriarchy, all of these anti-male things and anti-family things that led to the problems that we have today. Yes. I would like to say, I don't think this was overall conscious in terms of outcome. It was focused more on, there was such a careful eye on women are discriminated against that we couldn't see the forest for the trees. And there was also a lot of anger at men because they were divorced. There was divorces and so on. And the anger at men, the anger at fathers, the anger at led to a number of blind areas that I don't think were conspiratorially malintentioned, but they ended up being the word conspire means thinking together, breathing together, basically. And we were breathing together a perspective that saw no empathy for boys and for men, even when there was plenty of evidence around there to speak of that.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to definitely take your answer as a yes.
Yes.
I did contribute to that a lot. And I wonder, what do we do about that? I mean, we do have a huge problem right now with the narrative, not that men have problems, but that they are problems. And that one of their problems is too much power and too much privilege. And we live in a world, I remember that one of the first things I ever heard on one of Tom Golden's videos was that the reality of men's lived experience is pain and loss. That is what is really going on in the world of men. Yet we're in this dominating narrative that men are powerful, men are historical oppressors, that they live with all this privilege, that they don't have real problems that we need to pay attention to. And it's like you pointed out, this is also devastating to women in the long run, but it's so short-sighted in how we address problems between the two sexes. But ultimately, this is harming everyone, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down at all. If anything, it's gaining momentum and even more devastating power. over the lives of everyone. We have millions and millions and millions of women who are, their connection to their children is pictures on the wall of their cubicle at work. And they're in there 8, 10, 12 hours a day in middle of the road positions, going nowhere, missing their children like crazy, and still having to live under the illusion that they're somehow empowered by this lifestyle. Yes. It's amazing to me that this is going on and that we could just absolutely have no awareness of it whatsoever, it seems, in our culture.
And even if there is any awareness of it, it sometimes manifests in bizarre panel discussions like the one we talked about that took place, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. Maybe it was 2015, called Are Men Obsolete? Remember that one?
Right.
And where major feminist thinkers lined up on both sides of that question to talk about the evidence that men are obsolete. And even the ones that were taking the position that men were not obsolete, I can't remember that anybody had a good word to say about men. Well, the one exception was Camille Paglia. She was on that panel, and she did have good things to say about men, and she had a warning about what happens in a world where men seem to be becoming obsolete or being made marginal. But she was the only one, and even she did not actually make a full-throated defense of men of the sort I had expected that she might. All the others were contemptuous of men, indifferent to men's pain and suffering, indifferent to the disempowerment of men that they could see going on all around them. Many of them chortled about it and were quite gleeful and triumphant. So, well, I guess that's to say that in some areas of our society, there is an awareness of the unintended or intended consequences of feminist ideology in all these spheres, and the response is not what one would hope.
Yes, yes. Well, you would ask sort of like, what can we do about this? And I think there's so many things that we can do. First of all, we have to realize that in this point in history, women like Janice speaking up about these issues have far more credibility than any man does, because of all the problem that we're having. This is, the solution, the long-term solution is not women being men's spokespersons, but we sure need Janice, and we sure need Karen, and we sure need the women who are conscious of these things and willing to speak up about these things. And so I really honor you enormously, Janice, because women that just go along with the party line, and get a lot more approval and honors and promotions than women who speak up like you do. So that's one dimension of it. Second, we have to be aware of when we use words like men's rights. It is so challenging to say to any family member or any friend, "Oh, I'm part of a men's rights movement," and because the problem is exactly as it is, 99% of people respond to the word men's rights by thinking, "What? Men already have the rights. They make, and if they don't have the rights, they make the laws. They look, and they go into the, all the Supreme Court justices, all the, what they go into, and they give a litany of things that we supposedly have completely missed by using the word men's rights. And they tune us out before they can open their heart or their mind, and especially even open their mind, without which there's no opening of the heart. And so there is, and one of the reasons I sort of decided to do this next book on boys was because when I talk about the boy crisis, it doesn't shut women down or people down nearly as quickly, because we are, while females are biologically programmed to be protected by males and expect males to die in order so that they will live, they are biologically programmed also to protect their sons. And so when you start talking about the problem a boy has, there is much more heart opening than there is when we start talking about a problem that men have, exactly because the message we accurately want to get to ultimately is still the same message we need to get to, but it's blocked by using the term men's rights. Mm-hmm. But with boys, so for example, I remember one talking to one woman about the challenges that men take when they take the risks of rejection. And the only thing I could get from that woman was a whole litany of times like, risks of rejection, you must be kidding. I've had so many men ply me with drinks, and when I said no, they didn't pay attention to those no's. And so all she could think of was the ways she had experienced negative experiences with men over trying to overwhelm her. But when I talked about boys, and boys' fears of rejection, the same woman went right afterwards. This is like a minute later, said, "Oh my God, yes, my son. He tried to call Krista or whatever her name was last week, and he said before he was going to call her, I can't call her because she's so sweet and so cute. Other boys are interested in her. She seems to like me, but I'm sure she won't like me asking her out on a date. She'll think it's sexual. I think she likes me because I talk really nicely about things," and on and on. And the mother said, "Oh my God, he was just shaking in his boots about calling her." Through her son, she was able to see boys' fears. So I think one strategic thing that we need to be doing is we need to be interviewing boys. We need to be interviewing boys who didn't have fathers, boys who did have fathers, eliciting from boys in our videos the pain that they experienced by not having fathers, the pain they experienced by the fears that they felt when they were attracted to a girl or woman, and they felt that they would risk rejection. The fact that and we hear feminists say things like, "What is there about no that you don't understand?" Well, I'll tell you a few things about no that I don't understand. When a woman says no, does she mean no forever? Does she mean no till the next date if she says yes to the next date? Does she mean no until I offer her a drink so she can relax more, offer her some coffee so she can wake up, offer her talk more about her so she feels important, talk more about me so she doesn't feel I'm just hiding myself, talk more about my vulnerabilities, talk more about my accomplishments, turn on some music that's a slow dance music, turn on some music that's fast dance music. Did the last music I turned on, was that too rappy? Was that too this or that? Those are the things that no, that just a few examples of the things about no that have to become part of our fuller, nuanced discussions in schools, including really respecting our daughters by asking our daughters to share the risks of rejection. And at the very least, when they do say no, to say what the parameters are. I'm not comfortable holding hands right now, but if and when I become comfortable holding hands or kissing, I will take the responsibility of letting you know that I would like to kiss you or hold your hand, or since I know you're interested in that next stage, I will reach out and take that risk. And these are the types of things that would increase the respect for women, as opposed to what we've done in the last 50 years, which is we've gone from I am woman, I am strong, to I am woman, I've been wronged. And women have been competing for the greatest amount of victim power. That does not increase our respect for our daughters.
Amen.
Can I just add one more thing to that, too? We might consider at some point setting women down when they get pregnant and advising them that their sons will eventually become men. And that might be a good reason to pay attention.
Talk about the needing to state the obvious.
Indeed.
It's so sad.
Did we want to talk a little bit about the different parenting styles, Warren?
Sure, yes.
Because I think that's a fascinating piece of things that's so important for people to know about.
When I was doing the research for the Boy Crisis book, I started seeing all these misunderstandings between fathers and mothers that genuinely, and particularly in divorced families, where the mother was genuinely concerned that the father had let that child go to the playground, and the result of and then had not stayed at that playground with the child, and as a result, The father, the child maybe got into one out of 10 times got into a fight on the playground, and so that child came home a little bit messed up, but it was time for the mother to pick up the child. So it's Sunday afternoon, and so the mother picks up the child and says, what happened to you? And the kid said, I went to the playground. I got into a fight. Your dad didn't go to the playground with you? No. Well, what was your dad doing? He was home. The NFL game was on. He was home watching the game. Yeah. And now the mother is 100% convinced that the father cares more. And this is real life stories, by the way. The mother became 100% convinced that the father cared more about the NFL game than about the boy's safety. So I talked to the father, and the father says, no, I have a totally different take on this. And my take is, if my son gets into a fight, I want him to be able to come home. I want to be able to talk about with him about what were the red flags. Were the boys pushing each other? Were they having fouling practice? Which is what I used to do when we played basketball, to see who could foul with it and get away with it. Were they drinking? Were they sort of treating each other with a lack of respect? Were they pushing you and seeing how far they could get away with it? And in fact, the father said, all of these things I eventually found out were red flags, but I didn't have a chance to process those red flags, to talk with my son about this because he was being picked up too quickly. But my mentality in sending the boy to have some experiences on his own was so that I could teach the boy how to protect himself rather than protect him by being there and making sure he didn't get into any trouble ahead of time. Yes. And then I don't want to protect him, and then have him go out in the world unprotected and not knowing how to protect himself. That's a fundamental difference between mom-style parenting and dad-style parenting. This isn't mom wrong or dad wrong. It is parents that protect. We have to acknowledge the need for that protection up to a point, but it's up to a point that's the crucial thing. And it's checks and balances parenting. When the dad says, here is my best intent, here is my desire, here is why I would like to have the son picked up later today because he came back and he was hit. I want to talk with him about that, how to avoid that. And this is why, talking with each other as parents, even if there is a divorce, is so crucial. Another big example that I've heard at least 100 times in one way, shape, or form is roughhousing. And I remember one dad saying, I took we have 3 kids, and I said to them one day, sort of like, just okay, everybody I threw them all on the couch, and I said, okay, your job is to jump off the couch and jump onto my back and to pin me down before I pin the 3 of you together down. And are just fiercely filled with excitement. And mom's looking over and going, oh my God, this is somebody's going to end up hurt. Somebody's going to end up crying. But I don't want to be controlling. I don't want to take, the kids seem like they're having fun, but I just know in the heart of hearts that sooner or later, somebody's going to end up crying or getting hurt. Well, the mother's only about 99.99% likely to be right. Sooner or later, somebody gets hurt, and she thinks, all right, finally, now she's feeling guilty that she didn't interfere. The other part of her is feeling, all right, at least, Dad will learn. But does Dad learn? No. He goes back and says, Jimmy, you shouldn't have stuck your elbow in your sister's eye. And if you do that again, I'm going to stop the roughhousing. Okay, Daddy. Okay, Dad. No problem. We won't do that again. So then the children and mom's going, wait a minute. You didn't learn your lesson. You're letting the kids go back and roughhouse. You think the same thing's not going to happen. And sure enough, some version of the same thing that happens. The boy Jimmy doesn't stick his elbow in his sister's eye, but he pushes her too hard. And now Dad says the next time, that was much too hard to push. That was too hard to push. That was being aggressive. It wasn't being assertive. If you do that again, that's the end of the process for tonight. We'll pick it up tomorrow night. Mom goes, okay, end of the process tonight. But what? You're going to pick up the same roughhousing tonight? Don't you see they can't absorb that when they're excited? But the next night is when the payoff happens. The next night, dad says the same thing. You can't roughhouse this way. You can't do this. And the children are beginning to learn the difference between being assertive and aggressive, which they would have learned that difference intellectually. But now they know they're going to lose what they want to have, the roughhousing, if they don't pay attention to what dad says, what bullying is and what assertiveness versus aggressiveness is. And so now when they hear that they know from last night's experience they're going to lose the roughhousing if they do that. Right. And so they really start working on training themselves to have postponed gratification. Yes. Postponed gratification, that is to postpone the pleasure of pushing their sister or brother out of the way in exchange for the deeper, longer-term pleasure of continuing the roughhousing. Yes. Postponed gratification happens to be the single biggest predictor of success or failure. Huh. A child being able to, they're doing homework and they get distracted by an invitation to do a video game, and they say, nope, I have to focus on the homework first and do it. And so the children that learn that postponed gratification through not boundary setting, but boundary enforcement, a huge difference. People mix those two terms all the time. But the boundary setting and the boundary enforcement are another difference between mom and dad. Yes. Moms and dads pretty much set boundaries the same way. Right. Moms even set more boundaries than dads do. They both say, for example, you can't have your ice cream until you finish your peas. The children test the boundaries pretty much the same way. They try to have as few peas as possible before they can get their ice cream. The difference is in the enforcement of boundaries. The children, when the children say to mom, I've had a tough day at school. I was bullied. I didn't get a good grade. The teacher picked on me. Whatever. Mom will say, I'm not going to make a big deal out of a few peas. The child is suffering, and when the father says, no, he has to finish the deal of finishing the peas before the ice cream, the mother thinks, you're being so insensitive. You don't get our son or our daughter. But what happens when the child can manipulate a better deal through toying with the mother's empathy is that the child learns how to manipulate, how to be coercive. And so the data with mother parenting is that mothers feel far more coerced by children, far more disobedience, far more some version of the child giving the mother the finger. And whereas the dad is much more likely to say, sorry, you had a bad day at school, but the deal here is that you finish your peas, you get your ice cream. You don't finish your peas, you don't get your ice cream. Oh, Daddy, you are so mean. Mom doesn't do that. Well, we can continue whining and complaining. Then there'll be no more ice cream tomorrow night either. Yep. Uh-oh. Yep. Now I feel I have a choice to make, which is if I don't focus on finishing the peas, I'm never going to get that ice cream. And so what we see with studies of children raised predominantly by dads versus children raised predominantly by moms, that children raised predominantly by dads, only 15% of them have ADHD. This is an average of the boys and the girls. Huh. And whereas children raised predominantly by moms, 30% have ADHD. What? And if you look at that peas versus ice cream example, is that the children raised by the dads had to learn to focus their attention on doing what they needed to do, as opposed to their attention could go elsewhere to figuring out how I can manipulate a better deal. And they didn't have to focus on getting done what they needed to get done in order to get that ice cream or that postponed gratification.
Fascinating. Warren, on top of that, especially with the example of the roughhousing you were giving, that also goes a long way toward teaching empathy in children. Yes. That's a huge part, I know, of what fathers bring to the table in families is the instructions to forcing the children to see the world through someone else's eyes other than their own, and to follow rules that they may not understand, and to withhold physical force as the examples that you're giving so that you don't hurt people. You have to be aware of what's going on the other side of the fence. And it is no surprise to me that we see such a crisis in the last couple of generations in lack of empathy from all these single mother households. And that's not meant to demonize single mothers, but you're pointing out facts that the research supports. And we have to be able to look at that honestly.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's really got to happen is for both parents to understand the style of the other and to accept it as being different but important. And right now we don't have that, We just don't have it, especially from the mothers not really appreciating what the fathers do. Throw them out.
So being a person who always cares about, men taking responsibility, part of what I'm saying to men is, men, you need to do your homework on parenting. And you need to find out exactly that what Paul just said is not just a theory. Boys who do roughhousing with their fathers are likely to become more empathetic. I have never heard a father tell me, Warren, I explained to my wife that I want to do roughhousing to help the children become more empathetic.
They have no idea. They have no concept.
We have to do our homework, learn that there is hard data behind that. That's part of that hard data, like roughhousing, creating empathy, is extremely counterintuitive. We have to understand that women can't hear what men don't say, and men can't say it until they read it. And one of the reasons I put information like this in the Boy Crisis book is because I started examining all the parenting magazines. I can't blame men either. None of this stuff of the differences between dad style and mom style parenting was in parenting magazines. There was never an empathetic argument as to the science of the value of dad parenting. There was you can't find something in a parenting magazine or a book on these issues that is usually marketed to women that says, here are all the things that dad will do that will aggravate you, and here's their value. And it doesn't mean that dad should prevail. It means that there needs to be a positive tension, a checks and balances. Just like, when Republicans or Democrats are in power for too long, their power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Between mothers and fathers, the checks and balances are also very, very valuable too. The mother saying, the father saying, the child saying to the father, for example, can I climb the tree? And dad saying, yeah, but be careful. It's a tough tree. And mom, and then the child climbs the tree, and mom says, what are you doing letting that child climb the tree? He's too young, or she's too young. They could fall out of the tree. They can get a concussion. They can kill themselves. You're just completely irresponsible. And mom and dad having what some people call an argument, but I'd like to have people call an active discussion, intention about climbing that tree. And with the possible outcomes such as, yes, the child can climb the tree, but only up to here, says mom, and not on these branches, says mom. And dad, you have to be out and underneath that tree in case the child falls. And by the way, give me your cell phone. And the dad said, and dad explaining to mom, when children climb trees and take risks like that, their IQ increases, their ability to assess risks increases. This is all hard data from taking risks. And so the combination of mom saying, all right, I get that all these positive things will happen for my child climbing the tree, but I don't want the most negative thing to happen. And I'm programmed biologically to watch out for the most negative thing. And I know you're programmed to take risks. The way you got me is to marry you is the risks that you took, the things that you did that led me to feel that you're a great protector. And so the things that and one of the ways you found me is because you protected me, and you saw that my vulnerabilities appeal to you. So let's work this through and recognize that we're both needed here.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing to me, Warren, that the research is out there. It's just not being printed. The thing that blows my mind is the oxytocin stuff, where they found that fathers and mothers both get this burst of oxytocin. But what it does for the mother is it makes her want to, oh, sweetie, sweetie, cutie, cutie, motherese, they call it, to speak motherese. But for the father, the same hormone given to the father makes him want to do something active with the child.
Yes.
Same
Yes,
hormone, but it's different for both parents. We got to really honor those differences,
Mm-hmm.
Totally. And I think up the lines of what you're saying, Tom, is, one of the things I was really surprised to discover is that males have a whole nest of dormant synapses that when a child is born, those synapses begin to connect.
Really?
And that becomes the equivalent of a male parenting instinct.
Huh.
However, the synapses connect a little bit differently by what the dad perceives as his or her role. If he, in all cases, the synapses of a newborn child begin to connect to have a dad parenting instinct that is not the same as, but similar to the mom's parenting instinct in the type of way that you just mentioned about the oxytocin.
Yes.
But if the dad perceives that his primary job is to go out and earn more money and experience what I call the father's catch-22, that his way of loving the family is to be away from the love of the family. Right. And I now have to go from being a local sales representative to a national sales rep, which means I'm going to be away at most weekends and oftentimes at nights. That produces more of the other male testosterone in order to be a protective parent. So there's a combination of love but normal old male role. But if the father perceives his role as primarily a role of paying attention to the child and loving the child, then a lot of the synapses develop in such a way as to bring out a lot of the caring, loving types of hormones and instincts. And
that's fascinating.
And no one's talking about this. And
I know.
But I do find that when I explain this to moms go, "Wow, I just really felt that dad cared more about the NFL game playoffs than about the son." And I just accepted that as being the truth. And when we got divorced, I just knew that child needed to be with me. And so but I think that one of the things that all can do is to do, as I said before, start interviewing boys and who have the pain when they haven't been with their fathers. Interview boys who have grown up with fathers where the mother and father did divorce, but both were involved in what they saw. And most importantly, and as both of you all know, I've been spending the last 30 years more than almost anything else doing couples communication courses around the country. Right. And if people, and I see that the Achilles heel of all human beings is our inability to handle personal criticism without becoming defensive. Yes. And so when we can't handle that personal criticism, our partner becomes afraid to say things to us that are their truths. And before they know it, they're beginning to sort of harbor it, or it's building up as a volcano, and it leads to the destructive behavior. Yep. And then that ultimately leads to divorces, and that ultimately leads to the boy crisis, because the boys are much less likely to have their father involvement. And so if we want to do three huge things for the future of us, it's, let's get boys talking. Let's get women like Janice talking about these issues. Let's focus on boys. Let's hear their pain, and let's also hear the gifts that fathers brought them. So that, because we found that, for example, when we, a generation ago, we were completely opposed to gay rights, but it was the people talking about their brother and sister or cousin who was gay and talking about their stories that allowed people to sort of feel empathy. And so we need to tell stories in addition, and have those stories in real life form be part of our interview process.
And Warren, our hat is off to you collectively, for your getting the word out about all this, because that Boy Crisis book is just a piece of work. And I highly recommend that you guys have a look at it. It's well worth it. Many of the things we've talked about today will be in there, plus a whole lot more.
And for the guys and I get regular emails about this. This comes up in our groups. People ask questions when they say, what's the best way for me to present counter information to all these sick narrative points that are out there dominating in the world? Read that book.
Yep. Warren's a master of that.
it will give you the talking points you need. And I mean, I may see some things. I think we do need to talk in terms of men's rights, but certainly not to the exclusion of what Warren was talking about with reaching mothers. And I also will bring up as a part of this discussion, I think the importance of getting men to talk too, which is what we're doing regarding men, bringing them into an environment where they can talk without looking over their shoulder, or where they have to be afraid of being judged for what they're going to say. Exactly. And our experience with that, I know that Tom and Janice have seen the same thing. It is so amazing that we call these men, and we typically expect guys who have, just been introduced to Warren's material, or mine, or Tom's, or Janice's, that there's anger in there, because these guys are coming into this stuff often coming out of family courts that have stuck knives in their backs, or maybe they haven't seen their children in 3 years, or they've been falsely accused of something inappropriate with their children. We see this all the time in our groups. But what's amazing is that the moment these guys get in there and figure out that they're being listened to, that there's somebody on the other end of that conversation that wants to hear their story and wants to hear what happened to them and wants to empathize with their story, the anger is not there anymore. Yep. I mean, we don't see a bunch of guys scowling and, throwing beer cans and barking about things. They're vulnerable. They're helping each other. They impart amazing wisdom to each other in the group. Yeah. And I think this can become another part of this multi-pronged attack on the sick narratives. Is finally we have the technology and the worldwide reach to put men together in ways that are therapeutic for them, that are actually healing and give them a place to belong. And I know, Warren, in the 70s, you did a lot of men's groups. And so I just wanted to hear your impressions of what you're hearing about that now, and what your thoughts are about doing more men's groups.
Yes, and yes. I still start men's groups. The men's group I started when I moved out here to Mill Valley, with John Gray and a number of other men. Almost all the holistic producers in this area are all part of a men's group, and talking with each other. And I started some 300 men's groups. As you know, I was surprised to hear one day that this fellow joined the men's group and gave up his career and his solo career. It turned out to be John Lennon, who joined one of the men's groups that I started. But in the 300 or so men's groups that I started, I found that that it was like, and these were days in the 70s, and now I've been doing it until recently. The men had no clue how much they were holding on to, and most men came very skeptical. It was sort of like, I'll listen, but don't expect me to open up. But as other men opened up, it created permission. And before they knew it, they were opening up because they didn't feel so vulnerable. And other men, and as long as two things coexisted with these men's groups, that is, that they somebody wasn't dominating the conversation, and that someone didn't violate confidentiality. These men's groups became oftentimes the soul of the man was able to open up, and they became the most important thing in the men's lives, especially among the groups that lasted, that had those two parameters. Switching gears a little bit there, I want to talk about the importance of men speaking up and really affirm what you said. What you all are doing and getting men to speak up and having these types of communities of men formed where they feel that they can be listened to and heard is, probably one of the most important gifts you can give any human being, and especially men who are not programmed to open up in this way. And when I see anger, almost always, I teach in my couples work, the more anger you see, just look for the vulnerability. And almost always anger is vulnerability's mask. And these men, as you said, Paul, aren't even angry at the beginning because you have created a reputation of creating a group that will listen. The moment somebody feels that they will be listened to is the moment that anger begins to dissipate.
Right.
And so the only thing we need to do once we've done our work at healing that anger is to make sure that when we present men's issues to any woman that we love or just even care about, or any person we care about, because we have to remember that other men are biologically programmed to protect women also. So men will be the big protectors of women and not want to hear us talk about these issues as well. But anytime you sort of do the reading of the boy Christ and you say, all right, I have 10 great points here. Remember, none of those 10 great points should be picked up until stage 4. Stage 1 is listening. Stage 2 is listening. Stage 3 is listening. And stage 4 is revealing. And when you listen first, you role model what you want to have happen for you. And then you have a chance of making progress. Remembering, you presenting boys and men's issues is violating, is making an evolutionary shift from men dying so women would live to men hearing the people who would be willing to, she would want to have be, that are chosen by her for our disposability, not for our vulnerability. You are making an evolutionary shift in what you are asking a woman to do or what you're asking another man to tolerate from you when you begin to talk about your own issues. Women do not fall in love with, they fall in love with protector men. They fall in love with alpha men. They don't fall in love with men who are complaining. They don't fall in love with whining men. And so we are, this is why the men's movement is so much of an uphill battle. We are literally swimming upstream, and we have to have a tolerance for the fact that we are creating an evolutionary shift that will take generations to begin to make really good progress with.
Indeed.
I've often had that frustration, Warren, and just the reality that when you look at what's happening in places like the APA Division 51, what's going on in mental health industry, their messaging literally seems to be, you need to emulate what women will reject in order for ideologues to accept you.
Right.
And it's sort of like mold you, put yourself in my image. And it's really crazy because you're right. Women, we can want a perfect world. We can want all these great, wonderful, lofty, high ideals for human beings. In the end, women are not attracted to weak men. They are not attracted to non-powerful men. And to ignore this in the way you want to model masculinity, you want to create a model of masculinity that is totally against sexual selection in the human species. That's what we're looking at doing here. And it just strikes me as fundamentally crazy. Now, I agree. We need to step up a big deal and recognize men's sacrifices and thank them for those sacrifices, as you pointed out. But to ask men to embrace a feminine lifestyle, a feminine mode of feeling, a feminine everything, and then expect that they will succeed and have happy love lives is absolutely horrible, misguided advice for men.
And women, we can help women see this by, asking, why is there a movie called Officer and a Gentleman and not Private and a Pacifist?
The pacifist wouldn't be able to carry the woman out of the sweatshop or wherever it was that she worked at the end.
Yeah, to a private.
Why did Lois Lane ignore Clark Kent until she found out he was? Go to Clark Kent, tell me, Clark, about your vulnerabilities. And then once she found out that he was Superman, she fell in love with him and then credited herself to getting him to cry after he was Superman. Because the woman wants the Superman to be able to cry, but isn't interested in the Clark Kent crying. And and so
it's a great story.
God with the wind.
No, she does not want him to cry for himself. He's supposed to cry for a Kodak moment or a puppy or something like that, but not about his own problems. If he cries about his own problems, he's toast. Superman or not.
God, it's so true.
Yes,
so true. And I think, are we about finished? We better stop. We could go on for hours, and I've really enjoyed today.
And I just want you to really hear what Paul just said and to affirm it, that we have had histories of men complaining, but not about their own problems. They have protested and formed unions to be able to protect, to get money to protect their family, but to share, to say, I'm afraid of going to war. I might die. We had whole white feather campaigns that gave women, that insulted women, that insulted men in public, like in church, for being cowards, for not being willing to go to war, to die in order to protect. And this is the evolutionary heritage that we most honor when it's done, because we're going to need our male protectors, open up the protector space for women, but also open up the space for men who protect, care, and contribute in ways that are different as well. But this is an evolutionary shift. It's not going to be fast and easy. We, the three of you, are the pioneers in creating this shift, and it's not going to, it's not going to be something we're going to be rewarded for or acknowledged for very often and very easily.
I think we can live with it.
Indeed, indeed. Good.
Well, your work, Warren, has been absolutely fundamental. Your books are just incredibly helpful. Yes. So, I definitely want to honor you for that.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you.
And I hope you can come back and see us again, Warren. We'll have to do this again sometime, because there's so much more we could talk about today. I feel bad stopping, but we do have to stop. But
I love.
Good deal.
I love what we all do together, the synergy that we create.
I know people are interested to hear from you too, and maybe we'll invite you to do an Ask Me Anything at Regarding Men sometime.
Sure,
that would be awesome.
Yeah, if you're interested.
Yeah, that would be great.
The men there would just love that. They
would. Yeah,
everyone reveres you, Warren. They hold you up in very high esteem.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
And it might say that they hold Warren in high regard.
In high regard, yes. Indeed. Well said, Mr. Elam. And on that note, are we finished?
Yeah. I think we are.
And how do we stop?
By saying that men
are. Good.
Oh, we find a way each time.
Yeah.
I tried to be as quick as I could, Janice.
Men are good.
We'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.
Hey, we're going to try that 300 times, so.
Bye-bye.